And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hi there, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan, and this is your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on Sunday, October 5th, 2025. And starting off with the state of the sea ice, there is a little bit of early season development along the Beaufort Sea coast from Utqiagvik eastward to about Prudhoe Bay, but we're not anticipating any rapid growth coming up because, if anything, temperatures are going to be warming across the far north and along the Arctic coast. We have a strong area of low pressure coming up out of the west side of the Bering Sea, and it eventually will pass up into the Chukchi Sea, which is going to allow milder temperatures to be pulled northward across the mainland. In addition, we're going to have the problem of potentially coastal flooding, some beach erosion or high surf action that could extend anywhere from along just east of Utqiagvik down along the Chukchi Sea coast and all the way down through the YK deltas coming up here starting Tuesday and going through Wednesday. So as of this Sunday afternoon, we have an area of low pressure, Bristol Bay area, that will continue to translate energy eastward. We've had rain along the northern, northeastern Gulf Coast, spreading now into the Panhandle. So it's going to be a breezy and rainy night along the northeastern Gulf Coast and down into the Panhandle as the frontal system works its way eastward with this stream of moisture coming northward. But out to the west, this is the hint of the next weather system will be coming out of the North Pacific into the southwestern portion of the Bering Sea as we get into the day on Monday. So late tonight into Monday afternoon, we still have the low crossing the northwestern quadrant there of the Gulf, with the front extending up into the Panhandle with areas of rain or rain showers. But back here to the west, this is going to become the main low pressure area as it works from the western Bering on up toward the Chukchi Sea. We're going to see the pressure drop down to around 965 millibars. There's also a tightening pressure gradient, a strong wind field just above the surface and into the mid-levels of the atmosphere that is coming up across the Aleutians Monday afternoon. So there will be storm warnings in this region and a push of milder air. Temperatures could possibly flirt with 60 degrees in the eastern Aleutians or up into the Alaska Peninsula as we go into Tuesday afternoon. So by Tuesday afternoon, this low pressure area is crossing the Russian side of the Bering Strait and then heading up to the Chukchi Sea. Notice the pressure gradient, the tightening of the isobars extending there from the Chukchi Sea all the way down along the southwest coast. And as a result, we have this coastal flood watch in effect again from areas east of Utqiagvik all the way down to Kuskokwim Bay. So the areas down here first to be impacted Tuesday morning into the afternoon will be St. Lawrence Island, Nunavik Island, the YK deltas, and then spreading up into Norton Sound and the Seward Peninsula. And meanwhile, ridge of high pressure will nudge northeastward up along the northeastern Gulf Coast to the Panhandle, which will bring drier and mild weather for the Panhandle for midweek for Wednesday and Thursday. So in the meantime, Monday, with that front pushing up into the Panhandle with some areas of rain and rain showers, look for southeast to south winds 20 to 25 knots, waves 4 or 5 feet, Lynn Canal, 3-4 feet, Stevens Passage down toward Dixon Entrance. Outer coast winds will be southwesterly around 20 knots from off of Craig to outside of Cross Sound, and more southerly 20 knots at the Yakutat Bay and Cape Suckling. Tuesday winds come down. We have south to southeast winds around 10 knots for the inner channels, waves a foot or two. For the outer coast, still west-southwest winds, Sitka down through Port Alexander and Craig at about 15 knots with 10, 11 a foot waves, and then kind of more of a mixed bag of winds coming out of Cross Sound and then more northwesterly at 10 knots, Yakutat on over to Cape Suckling. Winds will be brisk here out through Lower Cook Inlet, northeast of Kodiak Island on Monday, westerly gales to 35 knots with waves up to 10 feet. Higher waves off the eastern Kenai coast, and as you get well outside of Hinchinbrook entrance, we could be looking at some 10-foot waves, southerly winds 20 knots. Within Prince William Sound, winds will be southeast at 15 knots with waves around 3 feet. For Tuesday, winds will be variable, only around 10 knots within Prince William Sound with waves running a couple of feet. And as we look further toward the west, we will find winds increasing from the southwest at 25 to 30 knots along the eastern Kenai coast, middle Lower Cook Inlet, with waves running anywhere from high 5, 6 feet to as high as 8 feet there around Kennedy Entrance. Across Kodiak Island on Monday, winds will be westerly 30 to 35 knots, strongest there within Shelikof Strait, where waves could be upwards of 9 feet. As we trail out down along the Alaska Peninsula, west-southwest winds 25 to 30 knots, though as high as 35 knots. possible there north of Cold Bay with waves of 10 to 12 feet. Now by Tuesday, we do have a stronger wind field that'll be creeping up along the Alaska Peninsula out ahead of that stronger front. So winds will be southwesterly around Kodiak Island to 30 knots on Tuesday with 8-foot waves, but as we get down along the lower half of the Alaska Peninsula, especially pushing toward the eastern Aleutians, we're going to see stronger gale force winds of 40 to 45 knots and waves building 12 to as high as 17 feet there south of False Pass. Now as we look toward the Aleutians on Monday, southwest winds 30 to 35 knots from Unalaska, Nikolsky to Atka. As we get west of Atka, we have gale force winds increasing. Southerly gales of 45 knots between Adak and Kiska, and then southwesterly storm force winds to 50 knots with waves over 20 feet there, Kiska to Shemya. Tuesday, we have the front work its way eastward, and along that front we have gale force winds south-southwesterly at 50 knots from the eastern Aleutians back through Nikolsky and Atka. As we get further west toward Adak, those winds fall off and become westerly at around 25 knots. Along the southwest coast Monday, winds will be westerly within Bristol Bay and southwesterly to 20 knots into Kuskokwim Bay along the lower Yukon coast in that wider expanse there of Norton Sound between Mnemonic and Nome. South winds 20 to 25 knots, waves 4 to 5 feet. As we get out toward St. Matthew and St. Paul, winds will be south-southwest 25 to 30 knots, waves building upwards of 10 to 15 feet, especially around the Pribilofs because they'll get hit first by that push of stronger winds. And then on Tuesday, everywhere along the west-southwest coast, we have gale force winds of 40 to 45 knots from Bristol Bay on up through the lower Yukon coast and 35-knot southerly gales there within Norton Sound. That's why we have the coastal flood watch in effect for Tuesday along this area of the west-southwest coast from, as I mentioned, all the way up to Utqiagvik down into Kuskokwim Bay and back out toward the Pribilovs and St. Matthew. Winds on Tuesday will be southwesterly gales of 45 knots with waves 20 to 24 feet. And then for Monday, Bering Strait, southeast winds 15 to 20 knots, waves 3 to 4 feet as we creep up the Chukchi Sea coastline. Southeast to south winds turning southwesterly once you get up past Point Leyte Wainwright. And then Utqiagvik to Prudhoe Bay, winds will be easterly at 15 to 20 knots. That's going to change come Tuesday. Those stronger winds will begin to creep northward. As we get into Tuesday night and Wednesday, that's when the stronger winds will come up along this section of the Chukchi Sea coast, so be ready for that. But in the meantime, we find through the Bering Strait, winds will be increasing from the south at about 30 knots, waves building 8 to 10 feet. The lower Chukchi Sea, once we get north of the Bering Strait, we have southeast winds of 25 knots out of Kotzebue Sound with waves of 8 feet. And then around the Lisburn Peninsula, generally easterly winds 10 knots there, especially Wainwright, Utqiagvik, and then back southwest to west 10 to 15 knots at Kaktovik. So this is just, again, the beginning of some stronger winds will be spreading upward along this area of the Arctic coast as we go through the day on Wednesday. So stay tuned to later forecasts, wind and wave heights.